While it's been one of journalism's marquee names for decades, The New Yorker is like any other news outlet. It has its ups and downs, times when it's setting the agenda and times when its relevance seems debatable. These days, though, the venerable magazine just might be the best it's ever been. Adam has more.
This week, it was a scoop about troubling claims involving New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, which prompted his immediate resignation.
She alleged he would frequently slap her across the face, choke her, and spit on her.
Last fall, it was coverage of sexual misconduct accusations against Harvey Weinstein, leading to his ouster and a shared Pulitzer for public service.
It's just an honor to be working on these stories.
And lately, the New Yorker's must-reads have gone beyond Me Too, from this profile of the man behind the Trump dossier to a look at how one company drove the opioid crisis. Even the fiction feels more relevant. Cat Person might have been the first ever short story to go viral.
He came for her in a kind of lunging motion and practically poured his tongue down her throat. It was a terrible kiss.
So what's behind the current New Yorker moment? Maybe a sense of heightened urgency in the age of Trump, which editor David Remnick definitely has.
Yes, he resembles a mad emperor at this point.
But features director Daniel Zaleski says there's another big factor, an influx of young staffers who can write quickly for the web or go longer in the magazine on topics that defy the New Yorker's stereotype.
It's fantastic when you have writers who are young, who are eager to write both about older people, but also about the culture that they have been inhabiting as, recent teenagers.
And with topics like those folded into the New Yorker's once fusty pages, $100 a year feels like a bargain.
All right, so we were having this debate earlier in the week about whether we should do this story. And Adam was going, if we're doing it, we're not going to write it because I'm not buying the premise. So when I was talking to the editor who put your piece together, and he turned to me, he didn't know we had had this discussion. He said, I feel like everywhere I go, people are talking about the New Yorker. I said, I know, Bob, that's kind of the way why we're doing it. But you were sort of resisting that. As a long-time reader of the New Yorker, you say it comes and goes with edginess and relevance, but you didn't see the surge, and we're saying there's a surge.
Oh, I didn't, and we had some of our younger colleagues saying, I'm paying attention to this magazine, and my friends are in a way that we never have before, and I thought, this is just millennials, discovering this magazine exists, but I don't think that's the case. The point that Daniel Zaleski made when I talked to him is that instead of, at the outset, they had, like Larissa McFarker or George Packer, staff writers like that who were used to the magazine, hopping over to the web to write something that was supposed to be fresh. And then they decided, no, what we want to do is we want to hire dedicated web writers. And they ended up hiring a bunch of young people who write for the web first, but can write for the magazine too. There was a piece that one of them, Gia Tolentino, just wrote about Juul, that little smoking device.
And she came from
Teen Vogue, and that was one that another one of our colleagues said, hey, you guys should do a story about this because this story was fabulous and it speaks to people who are my age. So yeah, I thought the premise was bogus. I no longer think it is. I will add that some of the stories about youth culture get my sort of crusty middle-aged man to come out. I don't care about that. But they're still doing a hell of a job right now.
I think the premise is at least half bogus. David Remnick has been the editor now since 1998, and I think he's been a fantastic editor. And I can't think of a time during his time as editor when the New Yorker has been irrelevant. You look back to Seymour Hersh breaking the story about the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. That was a huge story that helped redefine what we thought about the war in Iraq. I think their media coverage has been excellent over the years. So they're certainly on a fantastic run now. I mean, they just won a Pulitzer Prize for Ronan Farrow's.
Yeah, but it had an association, Dan, with the smoking jacket and the feet.
I think that's been over for a long time. I think Tina Brown changed that. I really do. I think you don't really go back to the days of Mr. Sean and being relevant is kind of goes against our mission. I mean, I think those days have been over for a long time now.
I think some of those smoking jacket people, if they're still around, might have objected to Cat Person, which is the fiction piece that you talked about. And I think that's a perfect example of something that spoke to millennials, but also explained the millennial mindset in a way.
From the inside.
From the inside. It explains some of what's going on in Me Too. And if you think back to the Aziz Ansari story and some of the other stories, it explained the emotions behind it, and it resonated resonated so well, and it was, it was both the old school. I mean, how many magazines regularly publish fiction, and the New Yorker sort of is true to its roots, so it's old school, but then it's bringing in something that just feels so of the moment. That was a high point for me.
So I've always objected to it from a people around here, and this is a Northeast thing, when I first came to Boston, worship at the altar of the New Yorker, which I rejected totally. I'm like, first of all, it's just like too white for me. Please. And I just couldn't. So, what has always drawn me in occasionally have been the Jill Lepores or a Seymour Hersh. One specific article, but on a regular basis, I found it, what I think has drawn other people, aside from what you've mentioned, these new young writers, is actually the radio show, which we carry on WGBH. I don't care for the host, that's David Remnick, but you get a chance to hear from the reporters, and it's quite detailed in how they have reported these issues, where the stories come from. It's fascinating. And I think that has driven, because that's a podcast for a lot of young people, and they've picked up on some of these other stories, and I think it's broadened their appeal hugely. It certainly made it more interesting to me in a way that it never was. So I think they're getting somewhere with that.
There was another point Daniel Zaleski made when I talked to him that I thought was interesting. He said that back in the day, the New Yorker had a tendency, pre-internet, to just sort of sit back and wait for the most talented and most ambitious people to come to them and say, hey, could we possibly do some work for you? They would just allow that procession to occur. Now, he said, because of the internet, they are routinely sort of beating the bushes, looking for good talent, young talent in particular, that might be able to fill a niche that needs filling. And he also said that the web and social media is a huge asset because it lets them reach an audience that wouldn't have picked up their stuff ordinarily, like with Cat Person, right? Because that was driven a lot by Twitter, Facebook, I think other social media. So that wouldn't have happened 15
And there was a
years ago.
backlash to it that actually helped drive traffic, I'm sure. When people start saying, why is this in the paper? Why is this in the magazine? That's a surefire way to drive up traffic.